Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches. And today I'm going to be talking about the revisionist Western film Soldier Blue. And we'll talk about what revisionist Western means in a little while. Movie itself opens with a group of Cheyenne warriors attacking a US cavalry payroll convoy. The attackers kill almost all of the soldiers and steal the gold. The only survivors of the attack are one young cavalryman, and a white woman who was travelling with the convoy. She's actually just spent the last 2 years among the Cheyenne, not entirely voluntarily, but she also is not entirely hostile to them, as we will discover. With no one to rely on but each other, the pair begin the cross-country journey to their original destination. And on the way, the cavalryman is shocked by the woman's salty language and her generally positive attitude towards her recent captors. She wasn't mistreated by them. She sees the Native Americans' clashes with the United States as being mostly caused by white greed, and is scornful of her companion's naivety on this subject. The duo will, of course, experience many hardships and difficulties along their journey, both human and otherwise. And when it finally seems like they may have reached safety, they might discover that they have walked into the most dangerous place of all. So, Soldier Blue was not a big success in its native United States upon its release. It had a mixed critical response, some pundits going so far as to call it anti-American, but it enjoyed a much better popular and critical response in the rest of the world. It was the third most successful film in the United Kingdom in the year of release, and in 2004 the BBC named it one of the most significant American films ever made. So, what's with all these strong opinions, and is the movie actually any good? Well, let's start with what kind of film it actually is. So it's most commonly identified, as I mentioned up at the top of the video, as a revisionist Western. And this is a fairly broad term given to any film which subverts the traditional Western formula of a strong white male lead, often a lawman or cavalry officer, who takes direct action on behalf of supposedly civilized people against those deemed to be uncivilized. Now, revisionist Westerns challenge and subvert this formula by introducing a lot more moral ambiguity into the story, making it less clear who is right and who is wrong, showing antagonists in a more sympathetic light, or, simply allowing native or non-male characters to have significant roles, for that matter. Now, those films had been around for a long time before 1970. I mean, going back to the very earliest days of cinema, really. And they had included some very famous titles: 1953's High Noon, 1956's The Searchers, things that are seen as classic westerns, may in fact be revisionist westerns. Now, Soldier Blue goes a lot further than merely subverting the tropes of the traditional Western. I would argue that it inverts them. It goes so far in the opposite direction that we again, there is no moral ambiguity here. We haven't gone from civilization good, non-civilization bad, to a more nuanced discussion. We've entirely inverted it. The villains here are very clear. It's just that they're the opposite of the traditional ones. The US cavalry in this movie are not the welcome sign of a last-minute rescue. They are the villains of the piece, a band of thuggish invaders who savagely murder defenseless women and children. Now, it should be noted that there is no moral ambiguity in the real-life events on which this film is based. Yes, Soldier Blue depicts the American soldiers as the villains, and they were. Because the end of the film depicts the events of the Sand Creek Massacre, a crime so outrageous that even in the 1860s, a pretty racist and violent time, those actions provoked official condemnation. I mean, nobody actually got punished because, racism, but it did kill the political aspirations of the commander who ordered it. So, yes, in real life, on November 29th, 1896, I'll get that right in a second, Colorado Territorial Militia, under the command of Colonel John Chivington, murdered and mutilated over 100 peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho, most of them women and children. Soldier Blue is a stark and confronting film. It begins with an on-screen warning, in fact, that the final screens were difficult to watch, and that warning is absolutely merited. But as awful as those scenes are to watch, and they have to be awful to capture anything like the reality of the event, I think they still, if anything, underplay the savagery and cruelty of the supposedly civilised, quote-unquote, troops who took part in the massacre. And look, this kind of content may well put many people off the film, and I can understand that. I don't tend to like media that wallows in misery and cruelty. But sometimes I think there's value in shining a light on the injustices of the past, and with one reservation that I'll talk about shortly, I think Soldier Blue does a pretty good job of that. And it's also worth noting that the film was intended to offer a commentary on the then contemporary Vietnam War in general and on the 1968 My Lai massacre in particular. Sometimes the injustices of the past are not all that long ago, particularly when you're talking about a film that is now 50 years old. So, my one reservation is the film's marketing, which to me carries a bit of a whiff of exploitation. I mean, as you can see from the image on your screen, the DVD cover features a nude native woman bound at the wrists. I mean, yes, shadows and the fact that she's facing away from us mean that there's no actual nudity, but the intimation is still there, the suggestion of salaciousness. And this image was used in a lot of the marketing, some of which also featured the almost boastful line, "the most savage film in history." And I don't think either of those decisions were particularly good ones. Now, a movie's marketing does not necessarily reflect the film itself, as demonstrated by the hysterically deceptive trailers for the 2007 film Bridge to Terabithia. Those trailers seemed to promise Hogwarts-style hijinks, and the film was nothing of the sort. But whereas the disconnect between the tone of the Terabithia marketing and the tone of the movie itself was clear and frankly immense, it's harder to say the same here. Is the violence at the end of Soldier Blue being presented with the relish that the marketing suggests, or with the abhorrence it deserves? It's a difficult balancing act to film a violent spectacle without seeming to wallow in said violence, and I'm not sure that Soldier Blue entirely succeeds on that front. I do think that the filmmakers' intentions were noble. I think that they intended to depict the events as abhorrent. I'm just not sure that they entirely succeeded in their execution. But it's a brave effort, and I think the film's heart is in the right place. If you can stomach the confronting content, I think it's worth a watch. But I can certainly see why it won't be for everyone. So, next time, the 2011 fantasy adventure miniseries Neverland. But that will indeed be next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.